Hi, welcome to Stories from the Port. Happy Canada Day. Tonight we have Patrick Sirianni talking about, oh my gosh, I forgot the title. Cranks and Challengers. The summer of 1886. Yes. I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome, as Shelley said, to Stories on the Port. I'm going to be talking about the summer of 1886. It was just unprecedented here in Niagara, only because of all the stunts that were being performed. Now, growing up in Niagara and living within a close proximity of the Whirlpool Rapids, they've always held a fascination for me. As a lad, many warm summer nights were spent early evenings down on the boardwalk for $2.50. The Great Gorge trip was always a great investment. Although no longer there today, the Daredevil display on the covered viewing station was just as well organized as it would have been in any museum. Interesting and factual, I often wondered whatever possessed people to attempt such crazy stunts to our Whirlpool Rapids. As I began to involve myself in local historical research several years ago, I could never find a book that covered the entire Carlisle Graham story, which actually extends from this summer of 1886 right through to about 1901. However, through old newspaper copy and microfilm from the Niagara Falls, New York newspaper and Buffalo papers as well, I have been able to put together the antics of cranks and challengers, and there were many during the summer of '86. Sounds like a fairly easy project, but because of my interest and curiosity, it wasn't. For example, when I began researching Carlisle Graham several years ago, I would read a story and then something else would be mentioned. They would, like, for instance, they mentioned Captain Matthew Webb. He attempted to swim the Whirlpool Rapids in 1883. Well, I immediately was interested in that story, so I started looking at Webb. Reading about Webb, they mentioned Joel Robinson's running the Whirlpool Rapids in the Maid of the Mist when they decided to sell it but had to get it to Queenston. Well, I got carried away with that story. A long story short, after several hours in the library, I was there to research Carlisle Graham. I walk away with two different stories, nothing to do with Carlisle Graham. So since then, what I've done now, I'm smart now about this. What I do is if I'm researching something and I find something else that's of interest, I write it down. And then when I'm finished my research on whatever particular topic I'm researching, I'll go back and have a look at it. Well, most of the time. During that particular summer and stretching right into late November, there would be more than 15 different people from all walks of life that would show up for appointments with our Whirlpool Rapids. During the course of events that summer, Carlisle Graham would get arrested and a man would drown in the whirlpool. Not to mention several would-be daredevils showing up and backing out at the last minute after a close-up view of those amazing rapids. Why all the sudden interest in the Whirlpool Rapids, I asked myself. The only thing I can assume is people were tired of tight roads. I mean, that had been going on since 1859, over and over and over again, and it became like the old expression, ho-hum, same old, same old. The rapids were a new challenge. The entire summer of 1886 would most certainly be an exciting one. Now, Carlisle Graham himself, he was first described by the Buffalo Press as a well-appearing young man, about 32 years old. Carlisle Graham announced to the Buffalo newspaper that he was, for the record, making a declaration that he would soon be making an attempt to tame the Whirlpool Rapids. The Niagara Falls Gazette had quite the rebuttal for him when writing about Graham's announcement in early July of '86, and quipped, "It would make for a poor summer if some crank did not make himself notorious by declaring his intentions to perform some impossible feat at Niagara. And for a few years previously, over the falls, in a boat, balloon, or some sort of flying machine was always the cry. These cranks often visit the area, talk long and loud about their plans, get their names in the local paper, and then disappear." Now, Carlisle Graham, on the other hand, claims to have been in the area for over 2 months getting ready for his trip, which he proposed to make on July 5th, and told reporters from the Buffalo Express that the Whirlpool Rapids are not as dangerous as has been imagined, and that the rapids could easily be passed in safety. And now I'm going to quote him here. I have been to the falls every Sunday since I arrived and have studied the action of the water thoroughly. 6 weeks ago, I took a small barrel 30 inches long and similar in shape to the one I planned to use for my excursion. I weighed it down with 50 pounds of sand and dropped it off the old suspension bridge. I had men walk all along the banks and note its progress. 8 minutes sufficed for its passing through the Whirlpool Rapids, and in that time, it did not go under once. When the barrel was taken from the water, not a mark could be seen upon it. Now, Graham, he was so confident that his trip would be successful and was planning to have him and the barrel towed down to a point in the river where Captain Matthew Webb had entered the water a few years ago. Now, let me just briefly mention Captain Matthew Webb. He came to Niagara. He didn't get a close-up view of the falls. He went down, and a man by the name of Conroy, who was a ferryman at the time, Webb hired him to take him down to a point where he could jump off the boat and dive into the water. Now, Conroy, he was a bit of a, he had an aggressive personality. So as they're going along in the boat down to the point where Webb's going to jump in the river, he looked at Webb and he said to him, "Did you get any money for swimming the English Channel?" And Webb said, "Oh, yeah, I got $15,000. And then Conroy said, "Do you have any left?" And Webb said, "Yeah, sure, I got about $10,000 left." And Conroy said to him, "Well, let me suggest you go back, spend your money before you do this." Which I thought was pretty funny. Now, anyway, Graham was confident the trip would be successful, down to a point where Captain Matthew Webb entered the water. At that appropriate location, the barrel and Graham would be dropped off the side of the boat and into the current. Now, claiming that his trip was successful, a second one, much more spectacular in nature, would be planned, with him and his barrel being dropped from the heights of the suspension bridge into the water to begin his journey, a distance of 190 feet. That's almost like going over the fall. Now, the barrel was described as being somewhat in the shape of an egg and made up of stabs, an 1.5 inch thick, and the barrel itself was almost 7 feet long. The barrel, Graham claimed, would be weighed to have a draft of 4 feet and will enter the craft through a manhole at the top and be fastened on the inside using a 6-inch canvas belt, which in turn would strap him into a bag-like hammock and supposedly keep him from striking the sides of the barrel. The design of 2 valves would allow for air when necessary and also have several holes which were to be plugged and used at his discretion. Now, as earlier mentioned, since Webb lost his life in 1883, it was thought that nobody would be foolhardy enough to risk life and limb in a trip of sorts through the treacherous Whirlpool Rapids. As a matter of fact, it had been 25 years since the first successful run of the rapids was accomplished by mate of the mist Captain Joel Robinson, and a small crew in 1861. And just to note, 1861, after Joel Robinson did that stunt, he went home. His wife said he was never the same. And he did die an early death. He died about 2 years later. Now, all the pre-trip testing conducted gave the somewhat adventurous Carlisle Graham a lot of confidence. So much so, he attempted and made efforts to get the railway to pay him a percentage of the passenger fares coming to Niagara to witness the event. So he's thinking to himself, I'm going to do this. Maybe I can hustle some money out of the railway. Because, hey, I'm attracting the people. They're coming in on rail. Give me a piece of the action. However, the railway refused his request, not having anything to do with schemes for which lives might be lost. After hearing the refusal, Graham concluded that he had best show his undertaking could be accomplished, and was quoted in the local press, "I am confident that I will be successful," and I'm not afraid to go through. I expect to be rowed down the river near where Webb went into the water and have the barrel dropped over the side into the stream. If I'm not allowed to go through in the rapids in public, I will go through them in private and convince the people it can be done. Now, many wagers were freely offered by his friends, but none were taken, that he would indeed go through the rapids. Some people looked on him as being foolhardy, many more insane, while others hoped that the authorities would interfere and prevent him from accomplishing his purposes. And that's what almost happened. Word spread through both communities on each side of the river that Graham was ready to make his attempt on Sunday, July 11th. Now, he did originally say July 6th, but because of technical difficulties, he moved it up to July 11th. And at about 2 p.m. as expected, the event would see a rather large crowd gather on each side of the riverbank to witness the event. Now, Graham left Buffalo on the Saturday evening. He was planning to stay at the Frontier House in Suspension Bridge. However, he did change his plan and decided to spend the night in the gorge below the Frontier House. In the gorge with his barrel. Him and his partner, so they could keep an eye on it. So about 5 a.m. the next morning, they were spotted sleeping in the gorge, and their appearance was seemingly suspicious. Constable Ed Mahoney was notified, and Graham and his accomplice were arrested, accused of being drifters in possession of stolen horse blankets. After failing to convince the arresting constable otherwise, the two so-called vagrants were marched up to the local lockup in the village, and all of Graham's visions of whirlpool fame seemed to be slipping away. He had not been formally told what he was being charged with, and he was beginning to believe that it was some kind of plot to prevent him from performing his stunt. Lucky for him, several of his friends intervened, and Graham was released on bail with instructions that he was to appear before the magistrate or the judge on Monday morning. As soon as he was released, he made his way to where the barrel was located and began to immediately prepare for his trip. It was decided that the trip would be made that afternoon when a large crowd of people from Buffalo were expected to arrive, friends of his. Now, shortly after 3 o'clock, Graham changes his clothes at the Frontier House and proceeds down to the old Maid of the Mist landing on the American side, where his craft is waiting to take him out into the lower river. Now, while walking down the riverbank, he was spotted by one of the village trustees and was soon being pursued by 2 local constables. But before they could reach him, Graham was aboard the boat with his barrel and in tow. There would be no turning back. Now, as the craft entered the water a quarter mile above the cantilever bridge, his assistant, fastening the lid before sending Graham on his way, said to him, "Are you all right? You sure you want to do this?" To which Graham replied, "I am bound to go. They will call me a crank if I back out now." The current was strong and the boat dared not delay, and he was quickly set adrift at exactly 3:53 p.m. Now, at first, the barrel drifted slowly with the current into a small eddy, where it rolled around several times before shooting out in the swift current and beneath the bridges, where it was submerged by the first big wave it hit. From the cliffs above, the barrel looked like an ordinary channel buoy drifting downstream. Seemingly, it kept to the middle of the river and was wholly submerged and rolling over and over. After the rapids ride, the barrel was carried across the whirlpool, quickly out into the river channel below it. It left the whirlpool at 4:01 and 4:25. Finally, it was floating among the boilers and little pools below Lewiston Heights. Now, while passing through the whirlpool, Graham momentarily opened the hatch, stuck his hand out to wave to all the people that were watching, and quickly had to refasten the lid as a wave hit him and a rush of water entered his craft. An elderly gentleman by the name of Pendergast, a Canadian fisherman, sat on his porch in Queenston, just looking up and down the river. Nobody in and around that location had been aware of Graham's recent undertaking. "John," he said to a young man by the name of Kirkland, "there's a channel buoy floating down the river. It must have come down from Buffalo. Let's go out and get it." When they grazed the side of the barrel, Graham could hear them, and he quickly removed the lid of the craft, thrust his hand out. Quite surprised, the old man almost fell out of the boat when looking inside and declared, "My God, there's a man inside." And he was later quoted as saying, I looked in, and the air that came out was so hot as a furnace. He seemed to be all right, though. He only needed some air, and we rode him to Lewiston. Now, arriving at the show in Lewiston, Graham started back to Suspension Bridge Village by the overland route almost immediately, with a light wagon bringing his barrel with him. At the American Hotel, Graham quickly entered a room on the second floor for a change of clothes. A hearty handshake followed, during which time Graham recited his experience. To tell you what occurred before you went out in the boat would be foolish, as you already know that. When they put me in the river, I closed the manhole plate and waited for developments. The barrel laying in the sun all day was awfully hot, but I made up my mind I would stand it. When I got into the barrel, the heat was so terrible I thought I should roast. I should have waited until the inside got cool, but the officers were coming down the bank and I had to drop in quickly. I tied the belt around my waist, but seeing it would slip down, I fastened myself with a rope and I tied on after they dropped me from the boat. When I got into the middle of the stream, I guess Hazlitt was afraid that I would back out. He asked me several times if I was ready to go, and despite the fact that I said yes, he held me. At last he called out to me and asked, don't you want to get out? And I answered, no, drop me. And in a few minutes I was sailing down the stream. Now after arriving in the whirlpool, I managed to get the manhole open and waved my hand, but I stopped the opening quick as the water dashed in on me and gave me a slight wetting. I found that just enough water to wet my feet had ended, but I guess that's a good thing as it cooled me down somewhat. The whirlpool is nothing compared to the lower rapids or the Devil's Hole rapids, as they're called. Can you imagine that? You look at the whirlpool rapids, these things are dangerous. And you look at the Devil's Hole rapids, they don't look to be as bad.
No.
But Carlisle Graham, the whirlpool is nothing compared to the lower rapids or Devil Hole rapids, as they're called. I had my worst experience in them. I would be on my back, then I would be tilted upright, and suddenly I would be rolled around as I stood. Twice I turned around on my face, but the barrel quickly righted. I had to stop my air hole several times in the Devil's Hole in order to keep myself from being flooded out. I'll tell you something though before I quit. I do not intend to do this again for free. The rolling of the barrel was such that I had not been picked up within 15 minutes. I would have soon been ill from the dizziness caused by the motion of the barrel. Wow. No, well, at the falls that evening, Graham's celebratory mood was changed when he was taken charge by the Suspension Bridge constable held at the local lockup to answer in front of the judge his earlier charge of stealing horse blankets. Now, at 8 o'clock the next morning, he appeared in court in front of Justice Eshelman, who formed the opinion that the blankets were indeed not stolen, and he was immediately discharged. Now, this little story appeared the next day. A crank knocks Graham. George White, his name was. He was an Oswego barber. Came here yesterday with the announced intention of swimming the rapids this morning, clad in a cork suit, about 3/4 of an inch thick. He said last night from the Bridge Street Hotel, that's here in Niagara Falls, Canada, that he had successfully swam the Lachine Rapids on the St. Lawrence River, and added, I know the whirlpool rapids are much worse, but with my cork suit I can get through them all right. I went down along the bank and had the folks point out the spot where Captain Webb was killed. His mistake was trying to drive through the mountain of foam, where the outside currents of the river surged to a peak. There is a sunken rock there against which he struck. In making my attempt, I will simply float on the surface, save my strength to push away from rocks. If I can stand it for 5 minutes, the current will carry me along underneath, and it would be best because the passage through the rapids only takes 4 minutes. So he says he can stand it for 5 minutes. Now somebody in the hotel, expressing disbelief, went out into the back room, came back out with a very large pail full of water, and then got White to immerse his head in, and they timed him. He lasted 4 minutes before he had to, he needed breath. And then when that was over, he said, you fellas need not think I'm fooling, for I intend to go through it It'll knock Graham sky in his barrel. It will knock Graham in his barrel sky high, and he will not have a chance to exhibit it himself. Now, in a reply to a question as in his object of making the attempt, White replied, "I'm a poor barber, and if I go through safely, I will make a fortune. If I don't, it will be a little loss to the world." Now, at 9 o'clock that evening, White heard that the Canadian detectives were after him, and he secluded himself. Before going away, White arranged with a few persons to witness his attempt, so there would be no dispute about the feat if he got through. The general sentiment is that if White gets into the rapids, he will be killed. The police on the American side say they will not interfere with White. As of 11 o'clock, a morning crowd of people had gathered on the bank, expecting him to appear, but up to this hour, he has not done so. Now, in the next day's commentary in the Gazette, a careful search yesterday failed to discover the whereabouts of George White, who wanted to swim the rapids in a court suit. The last positive record of him was late Thursday evening in the streets of Niagara Falls, Ontario. It's not known positive where he stayed Thursday night. It is claimed by some he is hiding from the police, and as soon as he can get away from them, he will make his trip. And then the Gazette goes on to say, the police make a mistake when they announce they will arrest any person attempting to go through the rapids on the grounds of self-murder. This fact known to a class of deadbeats who will come here, make a great blow of what they will do, get in the newspapers, and then skip out for fear of police interference. What is true of them may be said of others. At the present rate, there will be several more just such cranks here before the season is over, and they should be given the assurance that if they come here to swim the rapids, they must do so within an hour after they arrive or leave town. The man who spends day and night traveling from saloon to saloon with some sort of invention which you say will carry him through the rapids, getting drinks by exhibiting it, will never be missed by the country at large. And then White will probably never show up again, but if he should and desires to go through the rapids, he should be allowed to go. And if the dispatches from Oswego are true, surely he won't be missed. And then they printed this. Oswego, New York, July 15th. The George White who is mentioned in wanting to go through the rapids of Niagara River is a barber who eloped with a girl from Amsterdam some time ago after deserting his wife in Oswego. No attention should be paid him. So now, that's Carlisle's first adventure. And now what we're going to look at, I need to sit down. The competition. August the 8th, 1886. Now, after assisting Carlisle Graham with the construction and launch of his first craft through the Whirlpool Rapids, him and Carlisle worked together as actually barrel builders in Buffalo. George Hazlitt and William Potts quickly set themselves to construction of a two-man barrel, but they wanted to outdo Carlisle Graham. Now, Hazlitt was a little bit upset because of after all the effort he put into everything, helping Carlisle Graham, he never got a thank you. And being shunned by Carlisle Graham, because Carlisle Graham thought he was a celebrity now. He was too good for the guys that helped him. So, on that's why he wanted to do a trip of his own. Now, completed on Saturday afternoon and as a test of floatability, they launched it in the upper Niagara River at Black Rock on the American side. A party of 6 were involved in this endeavor, which included its soon-to-be two-man crew. Now, the plan was to tow it across the Niagara River to the Canadian shore. It passed a seaworthy test most satisfactory. Unlike the boat that was being used to tow it across, it took on a lot of water. The trip across the river had to be delayed until a more seaworthy boat could be found and borrowed. After obtaining a loaner, the barrel was floated over the Canadian shore at Chippewa and landing there about 11 o'clock at night. It remained there overnight at the home of James Hazlitt, George's dad, and at about 8:30 Sunday morning, the party and barrel were taken down to the Maid of the Mist landing on the Canadian side. The announcement of their voyage brought thousands of people from many of the neighboring cities. Every regular and excursion train arrived around Niagara completely loaded with thrill seekers. And by 3 p.m., the banks both sides of the river and bridges were filled with people. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
At the Main and the Mist landing near the falls on the Canadian side, the preparations were being made. And enough of Potts and Hazlitt's relatives were on hand that one could call the crowd there a small colony. Alex Hazlitt, his dad, acted as master of ceremonies, while William Potts' father, with pipe in mouth, entertained the newspapermen. Now, as Graham had complained about the intense heat of the barrel, preparations for this voyage included large pieces of ice placed inside the craft in order to cool the temperature. While waiting to go, William Potts stood off to one side looking cool and confident, while Hazlitt looked slightly fazed and quite nervous about the whole ordeal. At the moment, both men suited themselves with the shirt and drawers, put on light moccasins on their feet, and when questioned, both men denied any misgivings as to the success of the passage. They had planned to hire Captain Carter, the mate of the Mist, to tow them to the starting point. However, at the last minute, Carter backed out as he decided he did not want it to be a party in what just may be a sad ending. Luckily for Potts and Hazlitt, there were two small Protestant pilots who were only too willing to tow the barrel out, and after a delay of almost 2 hours, the cry was finally heard all along the riverbank. Here they come. At precisely 4:45, the barrel with a small American flag floating at its stern was turned out into the stream, and the barrel was finally let loose 200 yards above the Cantilever Bridge. The crowd on the bridges held their breath and watched as the craft struck the first breaker in the rapids and was whirled around. From there all the way down to the whirlpool, they experienced a series of tumbles, first on the crest of the wave and then out of sight beneath the heavy breakers. As the craft passed the inclined railway on the Canadian side, it was witnessed turning over in a complete somersault. And somehow the barrel survived buoyantly and continued to do so with the small flag attached and floating triumphantly. It was a quick ride to the whirlpool rapids, lasting about 2 minutes, and as it entered the whirlpool, it was seen to be nearer the Canadian side. Now, standing on the furthest point of the whirlpool outlet, just below Thompson Point, was William Potts' father, who hailed the son on the craft and received an answer from him. "We are all right," which seemingly eased the old gentleman's mind very much. Now, the passage through the Devil's Hole rapids was simply a repetitive of the first part of the trip. The barrel would roll and pass out of sight with the American flag always coming up on top and in good shape. By 5:19, the barrel had reached the still water under the old Lewiston Bridge when it was picked up by Sam Hazlitt, George's brother. During the later portion of their voyage, the two men had climbed out on the deck of their craft and rode astride on it for several hundred yards. Neither of the men were much disposed to talk of their experience after arriving on shore. Both of them had been well shaken up and jolted, and they felt disposed to be thankful that they had come out of it so lightly. Neither man had regained the equilibrium to explain the sensations, but both of them acknowledged that events transpired so quickly that there was no time to be afraid. Potts did speak briefly and said, "Graham said the Devil's Hole Rapids was the worst of it, and that's exactly the way we found it." With the exception of a few paint scratches and a little water leaking through the manhole plug, the craft was as dry and shipshape as it was before the start of the trip. Hazlitt accompanied the barrel to Chippewa. Potts went over the American side and back to Buffalo on the 9:27 train. At the Spencer House in Buffalo, he and his father were met by representatives of the Gazette newspaper, and when asked what the sensations were while passing through the rapids, he could not tell. The fact is, with all the rolling and tumbling, there wasn't much opportunity for observation. And when questioned about another voyage and being dropped from the railway suspension bridge, Potts replied, "That would be the last trip any man would ever take." Now, the men in the barrel are on exhibition in Buffalo for a few days, and if there's any money in it, another trip will be planned for next Saturday. The following day, Potts and Hazlitt were visited by Carlyle Graham, who is now offering a challenge. On Thursday, the 19th of August, Graham says he plans to go them one better. by dropping from the railroad suspension bridge and then float down to the Whirlpool Rapids. This will be the most daring feat ever performed in Niagara, and it is understood that Graham will extend to Potts and Hazlitt to drop at the same time. In another interview, Graham stated that if he's successful in this endeavor, he would then begin studying the falls with the idea of going over them. Okay, Graham's second trip, August the 8th, 1886. Now dubbed the hero of the Rapids, Graham made his second trip to the Rapids on August 19th. Pardon me. The original plan was to have his barrel drop from the bridge to begin his ride to the Rapids. However, the authorities on the bridge refused permission, and Graham was forced to begin his trip once again from the old maid of the Miss Landing. Graham's barrel now had been on display at what was then the new Whirlpool State Park, close to the elevator house that took passengers down to the gorge. In the early morning of Graham's scheduled stunt, the barrel had been torched by some unknown arsonist. Obviously, somebody had a personal dislike for Graham, but luckily it was put out quickly, and the only damage the barrel suffered was a scorching on one side. At about 3:55 p.m., the craft was cast off from the shore and quickly settled into the swift-drifting stream. But unlike the first trip, Graham decided to give the 10,000 witnesses lining the banks of the river an extra thrill. He would ride the entire distance of the Whirlpool Rapids with his head exposed. All that seemingly went well as Graham and the barrel rolled around for the first time near Manning's elevator. His head and face could be seen clearly by all. Several times during the ride, the barrel dipped out of sight and below the water's surface and finally entered the Whirlpool Rapids about 5 minutes later. A man by the name of C.D. Carlton was ready and waiting at the Whirlpool to conduct a rescue of Graham. When his craft entered in there, luck should have it, the barrel, after entering the Whirlpool, circled around, passed very close to the shore on the Canadian side, which was causing enough for a very undramatic rescue, and it was quickly stopped and hauled to shore. Now, speaking to all concerned about that trip, Graham said the weight of the waves did not bother him in the least, but the spray nearly strangled him, and $1,000 would not tempt him to repeat the trip again with his head and face exposed to the elements. And he was quoted as saying that he was quite doubtful he would have been able to survive if he had continued the trip through the Devil's Hole. Now, during the afternoon, while waiting for the Carlisle Graham extravaganza to begin, several people had gathered at the Whirlpool in order to witness the day's events. A man from Lewiston, well known as a local crank by the name of James Scott, was in attendance, and he was hoping to control a dramatic rescue of Graham in his barrel and collect $10 offered for the feat. So while he was there, he was drinking, spending his time, he was giving diving and swimming demonstrations in the Whirlpool. He had previously been involved as a witness in the Captain Webb inquest, which followed that unsuccessful swimming of the rapids a few years earlier, and received public ridicule when a dummy made of the mist was sent through the rapids, and he had to be hauled off his deck before its launching, as he insisted on wanting to be aboard and riding it through. Now, the demonstration of what he believed his great talents of swimming and diving came to an abrupt end when he dove in the water below Thompson Point, and the river quickly swallowed him up and drowned him. His lifeless body was found later the same day floating in the river near Lewiston, and the local press reported later that alcohol and drunkenness may have been responsible for Scott's death, as he was seen drinking quite heavily all day. Two men by the name of Primo and Becker publicly announced a challenge to Potts and Hats to race barrels through the Whirlpool Rapids for a wager of $500. Potts and Hazlitt, they accept the challenge, but later they have to delay the event because of James Scott's drowning, and Potts and Hazlitt are upset because the railway bring many people to Niagara for these events, but refuse to give any to the barrel stuffers. So the challengers leave town. August 21st, a Professor A.L. Davidson a professional swimming instructor, announced his intentions of riding the waves of the Whirlpool Rapids on a raft made of beer kegs while fastening himself to the top of it. A lot of beer to drink. August 22nd. James Kendall, a member of the Dawes Detective Agency located in the Boston area, he's reading about the successes of Graham and them in a local newspaper. He's sitting there with his buddies, and before the conversation ends, Kendall's got $1,000 in wagers that he could accomplish a swim with a cork life preserver and come out all right. Now, several other wagers were made totaling $10,000, a portion of which Kendall would receive if he attempted and survived. So on the following Saturday evening, he left Boston for Niagara Falls. Arriving at the suspension bridge on Sunday morning, he walked to the river for the first time and had a look upon the rapids of Niagara. They seemed somewhat angrier than what was anticipated, but this did not dampen his determination. He then rode a streetcar up to the falls area, getting off at the Western Hotel, where he checked his baggage and questioned a hotel clerk by the name of William Walker as to where he could hire a hack to take him over to see the falls. Returning back to the hotel around noon, he told Walker he needed a single rig for a drive and proceeded to tell Walker he was going to swim in the rapids. Walker supplied a one-horse, two-seat wagon, and the two of them together, started for the suspension bridge, and they stopped at Walker's residence for a little light lunch. Now, after suspension bridge around 2 p.m., they met up with a couple of Walker's friends, and together they walked down the hill with Kendall, who was smoking a cigar, totally unconcerned, as if swimming the rapids of Niagara were an everyday occurrence. Now, arriving at the Old Maid of the Mist landing, Kendall took off his clothes, with the exception of a red and white bathing suit, put on his cork preserver, and quickly dove into the water after telling those in attendance that he was going for a little swim. He swam out directly into the swift drift, which carried him into the rapids, and while looking up at the bridge, he waved to Walker, and then quickly passed into the rapids and out of sight. By the time Walker and his friends arrived at the whirlpool and rode the incline down, Walker had arrived at its shore and could be spotted lying on his back. The man aided Kendall with copious amounts of whiskey and with a vigorous amount of rubbing, and soon brought Kendall around. After returning to the top of the whirlpool on the Canadian side, Kendall was dressed and driven to the Waverley House in Niagara Falls, Ontario. Upon their arrival there, he had sufficiently recovered to autograph several cards and showed no signs of nervousness whatsoever. After a brief rest, they returned to the Western Hotel on the American side, and here Kendall was interviewed by a Gazette reporter. After getting out of the Canadian eddy, I struck for the center of the river and swam slowly along down, saving all the strength I could. After passing over the first big swell, I found I had no control over myself and realized I was turning somersaults and being thrown about. When I got a chance to draw a breath, I tried to, but a wave would generally strike me before, and I could hardly do so. Just before the Buttrey elevator, I thought I was near the American shore and I could see the rocks, and made an effort to avoid them. When I entered the whirlpool, I knew where I was and started to swim across. But when I was in the center, I got caught in a whirl, and after spinning around, I was sucked down under. It seemed as if I went miles. I thought I was gone and would have sold out for 3 cents. I was quickly thrown to the surface, almost unconscious, and with little or no strength left. As a last struggle, I threw myself on my back and kicked for shore. Although a good swimmer, it availed me nothing in the trip, and my survival was simply a miracle. The next 100 men who try it might lose their lives. There's not enough money in this world to tempt me to try again. So a lesson well learned. Now another man on August 23rd comes forward and claims he's going to go over the falls. Jacob Chanier, a 32-year-old barrel builder from Lancaster, New York, claims to be building a barrel and it will be ready in a fortnight, and tells all that he is quite familiar with the Niagara River. And at the end of the article, the reporter remarks that so is James Scott, who took a leap in the whirlpool while drunk and lost his life. Jack Long, another one, a champion featherweight fighter from New York City, arrives in Niagara on August 25th and announces his intention to jump from the new suspension bridge just north of the falls, a height of 196 feet. That is assumed to break all records and is considerably higher than the Brooklyn Bridge, and he's anxious to do so. The jump was not conducted on the day of his arrival. It was deemed the local police would not allow it. Several other dates have been mentioned, but for one reason or another, his jump was postponed on several occasions. Finally, one afternoon, he prepared for the jump with two assistants waiting in a boat below the bridge, but decided to cancel his plan because he required two boats to be waiting. He then quickly left town, proposed to return the next day, and was never seen again. Here's one for you, Lori. An ex-consular by the name of George Chalmers of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, had made a decision to swim the Whirlpool Rapids at Niagara Falls. He says he will start next week, and if nobody interferes with him, he will swim the Whirlpool Rapids without a cork jacket, barrel, or anything else, and depend on his power as a prolific swimmer to carry him through. He believes that any man can accomplish the task if he keeps cool and doesn't lose his head. He never showed up. One more short little story and then we'll be done. We're going to talk about the first woman to go through the Whirlpool Rapids. A 20-year-old Miss Sadie Allen of East Buffalo, who with her experienced escort, George Hazlitt, George went through, they rode the rapids in late November of 1886. Ooh. The torpedo-shaped barrel was the same one in which Hazlitt's other successful trip was made in August. The cask was 10 feet long, 3 feet wide, and now supported a battering ram and turret on top with an air pipe made of iron. The barrel was taken around to the Old Maiden in this dock. Sadie Allen was put up at Michael Hearn's Hotel on Fall Street, Niagara Falls, New York. At the hotel, when interviewed by the press, she was quoted as saying, "I don't think there's much danger, but I'm courageous enough anyway. I will come out all right." And then, as a surprise to everyone present, she remarked that she's never seen the Whirlpool Rapids. At 2 p.m., Sadie Allen crosses the new suspension bridge by the falls with a number of friends, laughing and chatting along the way. With the barrel in place and ready at the dock, Sadie handed her sister her hat and disappeared through the manhole cover and into the barrel. She was dressed in thick flannel clothing and wearing a dark plain dress. George Hazlitt quickly entered the cask. The hatch was closed, and they were towed by Elmer Jones and John Keating to the head of the Whirlpool Rapids. Now, because of inexperience, the oarsmen made a mistake and they got a little bit close to what's known as swift drift. Swift drift is a part of the river near the bridge where the current picks up real quick. Well, they got a little close and they had a difficult time trying to get out of it. They almost went through the rapids. A hearty welcome was received as their barrel hit the first big wave, went airborne and was spun around. Wave after wave, the cask rocked and rolled over the waves while at the same time bobbing below and above the surface. A few seconds shy of 3 minutes, the barrel entered the Whirlpool Rapids, went around twice before being caught by the current and entering the Devil's Hole Rapids. As they passed Thompson Point at its entrance, it looked as though the rapids were promising an unforgettable ride when suddenly the barrel was pushed into the calmer water of Cripp's Eddy, where it stayed without much movement until men from the Colt elevator were able to arrive on the scene with a rope, lasso the barrel, work at the shore, and rescue its captives. Neither occupant of the barrel were injured, but Sadie Allen was terribly sick, and at first landing she could barely walk. She was escorted back to Hearn's Hotel, where hundreds of people called on her in the day and well into the evening to offer their congratulations. First woman to do this. While relating her experience to a local reporter, Sadie seemed inclined to belittle the dangerous feat she had accomplished and spoke quite lightly of her achievement. She said, "I don't feel afraid at all, for I am sure that I would come out all right. I did not scream once during the trip, And the worst part of it was being sick. I drank a glass of wine before starting, so I think that might have made it worse. George Hazlitt confirmed the warnings received by local rivermen that low water in the river would make the rapids that much more angrier than he had earlier expected, by stating that the water was much rougher than in his first trip. We're badly shaken up, but Sadie, she behaved splendidly. She did not scream once. I wagered her $5 that she would, and I guess I lost the bet. Sadie Ellen and George Hazlitt were scheduled for an appearance at the Globe Museum in New York City and arrived there about 8 p.m. on Saturday, December the 4th. Upon arrival, a swarm of several hundred people were in hand to greet them. It took 4 constables to escort them to the door and into the museum. The New York Journal newspaper stated no prima donna ever created a bigger sensation upon arrival at an uptown hotel. And Sadie Ellen was later quoted in the local press as saying, "No amount of money can induce me to take the plunge again, and I don't know how long I shall remain on exhibition. It will depend on how well I like the museum life and whether the people care to see the girl who took the terrible trip." Sadie's tale ends the exciting events in and around the river during the year of 1886. Now, however, the antics of Carlisle Graham and several other so-called cranks did not end there. Between 1887 and 1901, Graham would continue his exploits in the lower Niagara River, which would see 2 more attempts, a swimming race through the rapids, and then he would turn his eye to possibly challenging the Horseshoe Falls, with several interesting barrel experiments over it. One event that Carlisle was involved in would also see the tragic death of Maud Willard, who rode the Whirlpool Rapids with her pet dog as a co-pilot. But we'll save those tales of challengers and cranks for another time. Thank you.
Wow. Okay, so if anybody has questions, go ahead and type them and we'll ask. Pat, I have maybe more of a comment. I guess I didn't realize that historically it's always been discouraged for people doing daredevil and stunts in the both over the gorge and over the falls. It was such a popular thing for such a period of time. I mean, I know now it's heavily discouraged. There's a $10,000 fine if you are to, attempt any stunting in the river. Was that always the case? Were people fined, or?
No, the way it was, local governments, and I think this is from both sides of the river, they were never consistent in what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Like Carlisle Graham goes through the rapids a couple of times. They don't really bother him.
Yeah.
Depends where you are. Now on the Canadian side, if they knew you were going and from where, they would chase you.
Right.
Because it was different. And, they were never. Nobody was ever on either side of the river very consistent about how they approached these lawbreakers.
Did they throw some of them in jail, or it was more just discouraged?
Briefly in jail, like especially the 20th century when they caught Mr. Monday, his first attempt over the fall.
Yeah.
They saw him from the International Control Dam, so they lift the dam, drops the water level. He got stranded out in the rocks. They go out with a tow truck winch, drag him to shore, take him to jail, they fine him, charge him. I mean, they release him, but you got fines. And over the years, the fines have been getting larger and larger.
Mm-hmm.
I think Carol Suchek, I was working at the Oaks Hotel. That's where he did all his press releases. When he did his stunt, I think he had to pay $1,000 fine.
Okay.
But then after that, they increased it to like thousands, like 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's very discouraged. Very discouraged.
Well.
Plus then too, if you run into a problem, get stuck in the rocks, and I've talked to Dan Hill about this, and he tells me stories about him and his dad going down there and pulling stuff out from between the rocks.
Right.
And then that's a dangerous job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even so now with search and rescue people, How many times have they been in the gorge rescuing somebody this summer?
Oh, a lot this summer, yeah.
Twice today.
Twice today?
Oh, jeez.
Well, I saw that there was someone that potentially broke their leg near the metal stairs. I didn't hear about the other one.
Yeah.
Was it down in that same area? Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
It's never been. I mean, it happens occasionally, but it's never been like it's been this year.
No.
I know a couple of weeks ago, one kid fell into the rapids. And from this location, he went missing. They never did find him, and I suggested to a friend of mine that they wait about 12 days. So probably, depending where you fall in, where he fell in, others have fallen in, and the others turned up in out front of Porter, New York, or Youngstown.
Okay.
In that area,
Yeah.
where they find the bodies, and that all depends on water temperature and blah blah blah. But I have predicted a couple would turn up there. It depends where they fall in. At one time, if they went over the falls, a suicide, you can 90% of the time catch them coming up at the nape of the mist.
Mm-hmm.
But then I don't know, the difference of the water, the way the water flows has changed slightly. And for a few years, one summer when I was working sightseeing, used to do an early morning tour. Our first stop was at the Aero Car. I reported 4 bodies that summer. So I was first to see them early in the morning with the tour bus. And they were all ending up with a whirlpool. So, a lot of it depends on the flow of the water. But yeah, tragic thing. And like I say, these firefighting people, I give them a lot of credit. They risk their neck just to save somebody that just being stupid.
A lot of high angle rescues. A lot.
Yeah.
We have a couple people sitting on the lawn tonight. Does anybody behind me have a question? No?
I have.
Okay.
So we're talking about how it's always been discouraged for the stunting, but there's obviously a lot of people who did the tightrope. But you can't really get away with doing a tightrope without permission somehow.
Say that again?
So there's people who are going over the gorge on a tightrope.
Yeah.
All the time. Now, obviously, you can't just up and string a tightrope in a couple of minutes, and so I'm assuming they had permission of some sort.
Well, yeah, they permitted a lot of that stuff, but it got to the point where, like, guys like Blondin, how many trips did he make between 1859 and 1860? And then you had the great Bellini, and then you had that Italian girl. She showed up here on that year for 2 different performances. One on July 1st, one on July 4th. But the weather was so bad she had to cancel both of them. And she had planned 10, 12 trips. So, it was just continuous. Stephen Peer, of course, and so many others. They come here and do their stunts. It's the same old. People are getting tired of it. And then a guy like Carl Grant comes along and says, hey, let's try this. and everybody goes wild for it.
Was her name Maria Spelterini? Is that her? Yeah. Okay. I don't know why that came to me, but it did.
Peach baskets.
Yes. I just saw that picture somewhere recently. Did you just post on something? No. Where did I see it? Well, I know it's in Daredevil Alley, but
what impresses me,
I saw it somewhere recently, like in the last couple of days.
That picture, the amount of people that are on that bridge watching. The bridge is just jammed full of people.
Right.
And like she had already canceled twice.
Right.
So this was like July the 8th, and still attracting big crowds.
Quite amazing. Well, when Nick Wallenda was here back in 2012. Was it 2012? Anyone?
Yeah.
Around 2012. The crowds were massive. There was quite a few people down there.
Nick Wallenda until I was on the American side a few weeks after, and they had a piece of his cable between 2 rocks.
Right.
The sign said Nick Wallenda's cable.
Right.
It's the size of a sidewalk. And you know who else had a real thick cable? Was Blondin.
Oh, yeah?
Stephen Peer, 5/8 of an inch thick.
Oh wow.
And he could
that's
outperform
frightening.
everybody, that kid. Tragically, we lost him. And he was local,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Jay Cochran. What was his? Do you know anything about Jay Cochran? I mean, that's more recent wire walking. Jay Cochran,
Oh yeah,
the
he did
king
a
of
lot
the
of
air.
stunts. Yeah, he was here like all summer long.
Yes, yes, I
Yeah,
remember for several
Once a week or
summers.
whatever,
Yeah,
he'd-
on the hotels and the casino, and that was, but
I'm
never
surprised
over the
they allowed
falls.
that, you know, with the
Which
Park
one was
Commission
it
at the
that
time.
did, which one was it that cooked the breakfast with the manager on their back?
Oh yeah, who was
On a
that?
Stove, actually had a stove.
Who?
Somebody, that's what I'm asking. Somebody went out there with a stove and actually cooked a meal.
Oh, that was out on the aero car?
I don't know where.
Up
was
on,
it-
oh no, on top of the Skyline?
No, it was on a tightrope.
Well, there was this guy here in the early 70s. He wanted permission to go across the whirlpool aero car in the cable, and he did a private show on some kind of a motorcycle
Oh, okay.
top of the aero car, and then he balanced a chair on the edge of the Skyline Tower like this. Russian or something like that.
No,
That was in the 70s.
I know who you're talking about. It was in the 18 the peak time for wire walking in the 1860s. I don't remember who that was. I know what you're talking about though. Yeah, the full meal.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Will, do you have any questions?
No.
Nope. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on Canada Day. It is such a beautiful day out here right now.
Now it's nice.
Oh, it's so amazing right now. There's only a very light breeze, but it's still quite warm. And I want to thank you, Pat. As always, this is the fourth summer Pat has come out to talk on the porch. He's a really wonderful supporter of Stories from the Porch, and we're really a big fan of the things that he does. When he's not here telling stories on the front porch, you can find Patrick as the moderator for Niagara History and Trivia on Facebook as well. He is also the City of Niagara Falls official town crier. So, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I hope you caught his cry this morning. It was pretty spectacular. And next week we have Leela Paw talking about her travels to Antarctica, and we look forward to that, and we hope to see everybody next week. Have a great night. Thank you.
Night.